all profit is value extraction. And that means that all profit is theft from you.
Corporate America is on welfare, and we got to get them off welfare.
Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all.
Hello, and welcome to Cars and Comrades, where we talk about car stuff from a leftist perspective. Today's episode will be focused on the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement of the late 60s and early 70s. Now, this is probably going to be a two-part episode, but we're not 100% sure yet, so you'll be finding out probably around the time that we are. Just don't be sad when it ends early. We'll have the second episode up at the same time. So, buckle up and join us along the road to revolution, and also find us on social media, because we are on some of those platforms. You can find us on Instagram at Cars and Comrades Podcast, and our Twitter account is, you guessed it, Cars and Comrades. You can also email us at carsandcomrades@gmail.com. There is a bit of a pattern there, so, give that a try. We're happy to hear from listeners, so email us suggestions, complaints, potential topics, and perhaps your own questions that we might address on the air. We don't really know what we're doing yet, because we did just start this podcast, so we don't know what will happen to your email, but you can shoot us a message to find out. Anyway, let's get into our discussion on the labor history of Detroit in the 1960s. Anyway, before we get into our discussion on the labor movement in Detroit in the 1960s, we're probably just going to start with talking about our own personal projects. So let's see what everybody worked on this week. Bryant, what did you work on this week?
Well, before I say that, don't we have a Facebook page also? Or are we on any other social media?
You are probably correct.
Whatever. You can find us. Just search for Cars and Comrades, whatever. You'll find it. So I have not been doing a whole lot lately because it's like 5 degrees outside and I don't want to go out into the garage and do anything. But I did order and receive, you can hear the package here, ASMR type stuff, throttle cable for my moped. So hopefully I can get that put back together and running and riding by the time, the weather's good. Or by the time I need to move, which is coming up. We'll see which happens first. And also, since I last talked to y'all, I brewed some beer. I think I told you I was making a Budweiser clone. So I got some rice and 6-row barley and made some beer out of that. And I got a hoppy cider also. So that's in my kegerator right now in the garage. And since it's so cold, I accidentally made Applejack. So it concentrated the cider by freeze distillation, and that'll get you pretty ripped, let me tell you.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's the highest alcohol content beers in the world. That's how they do that shit.
Yeah.
Wait, tell me more about this. Hold on. I need to know more.
Yeah, so water freezes at 32 degrees or whatever, or 0 for the metric people, and but alcohol freezes at a much lower temperature, like 20 something. And if you have beer or wine or whatever or cider and you freeze it, the water will freeze out at the top first, so you'll get a bunch of ice crystals floating on top, and then it'll become more concentrated. Yeah, and since my keg, the pickup is in the bottom, it sucks up all the concentrated alcohol at the bottom. The problem with that, though, is it concentrates everything. So all the like methanol and nasty stuff that gives you a hangover is also just as concentrated in there. So
nice.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah, that's like a trick. Like when like breweries do the like world record setting alcohol content beers, they're basically cheating because it's called like frost distillation, but it's not technically distillation, so you can get away with still calling it beer, even though like literally the highest alcohol content beer in the world I think was like 100 proof.
Right. Yeah. There was a few years ago, like maybe 10 years ago, there was a couple different breweries that were going back and forth trying to have the strongest beer. I think one of them was Brewdog. Brewdog in Scotland. Yeah. And they did these weird they put the bottle inside of like a taxidermied like squirrel skin, so that like the mouth of the animal was the mouth of the bottle. It was really weird. I didn't quite understand.
I know a really funny story about this real quick. At one point, Brewdog had the world record. I forget, it was some like absurd name, and then a German company beat them. So they brewed another beer to beat the German company, but because they're like Scottish or whatever, and they were beating a German company, once they brewed the new beer that was the world record, like strongest beer, they named it Sink the Bismarck.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, zero chill, except that it was literally frost distilled, so like a lot of chill, but you know that.
Yeah. And I think there was some guy in Canada using the same method for desalinating seawater. So he'd like get ocean water and freeze it, and you know the salty stuff would be on the bottom, and the fresh water would be, you know, ice or whatever. So I don't know. It's kind of a cool process.
Very cool process.
Indeed.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's freezing. It's cool.
Yes.
Okay, just make sure you guys got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Zach, Bryant, if you're done, what did you work on, Zach?
I'm just waiting on parts, man. Ordered a bunch of stuff for my Audi, and a lot of it's coming from Germany. So just playing that old waiting game, waiting for parts to show up, and then I'm going to freeze my Tookus off and slap them in there, hopefully quickly.
Yeah, I hope so.
And correctly. That's probably the more important part. Yeah, I'm just checking that UPS tracking now.
Nice.
That's it.
Cool.
Sorry, that wasn't very exciting.
Then I'll go next. So I haven't really worked on too much on account of it being 5 degrees, and also I don't have the main car right now, so it's still in the shop. I know in a previous episode I kind of explained that I was planning on balancing my own engine internals, so the like rods and pistons and whatnot, and I was going to shave down little bits of material and get them all to be about the same weight, and I decided not to do that because for an extra $250 a proper professional would do it for me. So I decided that was probably the safer method, because I did have some people message me and say, hey, that's not like the proper way to do that. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. I should leave this to a professional machine shop. So I did. So yeah, I wanted to do it. I'm a little disappointed that I don't get to do it now, but I do feel better about how it's going to get done. So I made that decision, and then I think just yesterday I had some more parts show up, so those will be going over to the shop soon. I got a ported lower intake manifold and a larger 4-inch intake tube. Which
I saw the pictures you posted of those. They looking good.
At first, like, you know, usually a cold air intake doesn't really do that much, and this is just a bigger one, and I was like, you know. But I do follow the people who like make this stuff custom, like, and so I started seeing them like post up their actual dyno numbers on them, and you know they show improvements over, you know, regular K&N kits and stuff, and I was like, well, fuck, I don't know, maybe there's something to it. So I guess it works with like, it has a Venturi effect or something, and whatever. Somehow that bigger tube gets the air through faster. So.
It's got science built right into it.
Yep, something like that. So anyway, more air, more gas, more power. That's the idea anyway. So
that math checks out. Yeah.
If nothing else, it'll be louder. That's what's important, right?
That too. I'm excited because my car's had a fucking exhaust leak forever. Because it's lowered. And I've gone through a couple flex pipes that they keep fucking shredding on speed bumps and stuff. So I'm going to have no flex pipes. And so for the first time, I'm going to hear my exhaust coming out the back of the car for the first time in like or more. So like I've never heard any intake sounds from my car because I just hear like farting exhaust the whole time. So this will be really cool. Like the car's going to sound how it's supposed to, and I'm sure it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience.
Do you also get like sleepy and get a headache while you're driving? Or?
No, it's on the passenger side. So
Oh, okay, that's fine.
so I don't have to worry as much.
Yeah, I had that problem on my Subaru when I first bought it, and I just went through and replaced every single exhaust gasket, and bought a carbon monoxide detector and just put it in the center console of my car. So it hasn't happened since then, but also I have 0 flex joints in my exhaust right now, and I think that might be the rattle that I'm hearing when it's cold that I thought was piston slap. So I'm hoping that it's the exhaust rattling and not the piston wearing out. But I
bet some solid motor mounts would help that.
With more rattling or what?
Less rattling because, if your exhaust like can't flex, but your engine's still flexing, you can get all kinds of rattles. Whereas the solid motor mounts, which I do have, can kind of keep everything in place a little bit better.
No, I mean I'm not drifting this thing or driving it, real hard. So I don't know if I really need the pro whatever level.
Oh, I'll tell
motor
you, dude.
Mounts.
So for me, the stock motor mounts to get like stock replacements is like I think it's like they're close to 200 each, and
wow.
Yeah, they're outrageously expensive. By the way, when I worked at O'Reilly Auto Parts, I got those, so they were like selling them for like close to $200 a piece. I got them for $30 a piece on my employee discount. So yeah, it's pretty. Wow. It's a big markup. But I have solid ones now, and I paid like $120 for the pair, and it's not harsh at all. Like the car feels so much better. It's way easier to drive. A lot less slop. Yeah, it's I actually kind of recommend it. Everyone talks about it like, oh my God, it'll make your car undrivable. And my car has never been more drivable. It is the best. So
all of my cars are basically undrivable as is. So
there you go. Yeah, very, very something worth considering, Brian. Definitely, I recommend it. It worked very well for me.
Yeah. Well, I was talking with James and I was talking about my MR2 and maybe putting like poly bushings in there, and he's like, no, you don't want to do that if it's driven on the street. I had such and such car and it really fucked it up with that. So I've been a little bit hesitant to do any of that kind of stuff. I did do just OEM replacement motor mounts on my Subaru, and that helped it a little bit because the old ones were a little bit worn. But yeah, I definitely didn't pay more than, I don't know, like $20 each for them or something like that. I don't remember how much it was.
Yeah.
But it is a kind of a pain in the ass to actually jack up the whole engine and transmission and put them in there. But it's not as bad as on some cars, I guess.
I always found Subaru motor mounts in general to be very easy to work on comparatively.
Right. Yeah. I mean, compared to other cars, the motor mounts are not bad. But as far as jobs that I actually want to do, it's not high up on the list.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all I've got. So, Brandon, how about you? What'd you work on this week?
I finally got a heater for my shop, and it's not quite as frigidly cold here as y'all are experiencing. So I don't know. Like I kind of just went to the shop and stared at stuff a whole bunch. And accomplished nothing.
That's a good way to do it. Yeah, go out to the garage and stare at the project and just like chain smoke or drink a few beers. That's my technique usually.
I got to replace a whole window frame on my van, like the entire mating surface for the windshield, and it is daunting. So like, I'm just figuring out. I think I might have figured out a couple of different ways I want to try. I got to grab some sheet metal. A big part of this week was like cleaning things up and figuring out like how much metal needs removed versus like what can be saved or welded around, et cetera, et cetera. I've got parts vans that I can pull some stuff off of, but I'm going to try and fabricate as much of this as I can. So building a tool list of things I need to work with sheet metal. I got to get a shrinker stretcher set so that I can get the radius across the length of it and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to salvage the A-pillars, or are you going to try and or do you think you might have to just cut those out and get a clean new A-pillars?
No, the A-pillars, other than the specific part where the windshield mated to it are fine.
Oh, good.
The problem is the biggest problem is the brace that goes from across the top of the van from one A-pillar to the other is completely rotted out. Where it meets the A-pillars, it has rotted out so much that it is not currently in the van. So that's the biggest headache, because not only do I have to be able to fabricate all of that stuff, and it's really weird the way that it mounts into the A-pillars. There's also no structural integrity across that, so I have to be really careful about what I remove first so that I don't deform the shape of the windshield.
Yeah.
So I'm going very slowly on it, but I just don't want to make some mistake, which I have other vans. So if it gets out of shape, I can go get measurements from something else, but I would rather just, make this as easy as possible. So
yeah, get it right the first time.
I'm hoping to be able to start welding on it this week. We'll see.
Well, that's quite a project.
Yeah. I've also been brainstorming. I might go ahead and in the spring, if I can make some decent progress on the van, I might go ahead and swap out the drivetrain in my car, put my big block in it. Just because I kind of I was thinking about doing a cam and valve train work on this motor. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to do all that, I honestly might as well just swap out the drivetrain. It's an old enough car that it's probably a dozen bolts in an afternoon to pull the engine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess
and
that's...
you'd be putting a big block Chevy in there, or some other kind of big block?
No, I have a big block Olds for it. It's a 455 Olds. I'm really fascinated by those motors because you can't make crazy horsepower with them, by which I mean 600 plus. But they're really good at making low end torque. Before diesel motors were common, they were used where a lot of diesel motors would be now, in boats and stuff like that.
Okay.
But you can also build them to get weirdly good fuel economy for what they are.
Yeah.
So I have an overdrive transmission. What's that?
In the teens, possibly?
High teens, low.
As far as people... Wow, that is surprisingly good.
If I put this overdrive transmission behind it and the right cam, I might be able to get it in the low 20s.
That is
that's
incredible. Considering I get that out of a turbocharged 4-cylinder right now.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, I've been really debating how I want that motor to perform, and I think what I've decided is I'm going to make a relatively fuel efficient motor. I'm just going to put in a cam that makes peak torque right around my cruising RPMs, and that's fine because with 455 cubic inches, I have enough to get up to speed.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't need something that's high revving. Oldsmobile motors are notorious for not wanting to rev high because the oil doesn't like to return to the bottom end. So unless you machine the block, a performance modification for a high RPM Olds motor is a low flow oil pump so that all the oil doesn't get stuck in the top end.
Huh.
Or at least
very strange.
I'm speaking authoritatively. I don't know that based on experience, but a few people have told me if you're turning high RPMs with a big block Olds, put a low flow oil pump just so that, everything doesn't get stuck in the, top end.
Seems like it'd be easier to drill some more drains or have a scavenge pump or something.
Oh, I mean, you definitely can do that. It's just definitely more work.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bother with any of that. If I have that much low end torque, because Hot Rod magazine did a shootout years ago between a bunch of relatively stock applications, and the 455 Olds with I think it was cam and headers was faster off the line than Hemi cars. Just because the way it's built, it won't flow as high at higher RPMs, but off the line they're a beast. So I'm messing around with that. I found a really cheap 200 4R transmission. So I'm going to go through that and maybe see if I can beef that up for a couple of $100 to handle the 455. And if I've heard people saying that with a 3-speed, they were getting like 16 to 18 miles to a gallon out of a 455. And the overdrive on a 200 is, I think, 0.67. So, you know, I would be getting roughly 30% improvement over that. So, I mean, you're talking at that point, theoretically, like, you know, if we're bench racing here or bench fuel economizing or whatever, that's 24 miles to a gallon.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet.
And I mean, like, it's not wholly unrealistic. My buddy has a 65 Mustang, which granted they're really light cars. It's a 302 in it, but he's got AOD transmission in it. Highway, he gets 28 miles to a gallon.
Nice.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of bench racing stuff on my end, but some sheet metal work. And I'm back to welding at work, so I get to practice at work and then go work on my projects all fresh and everything. And, you know, I guess that's really about what I've done. It's been cold, so my motivation is lacking, even though I have been able to do a little bit.
Before we move on, have you all ever seen this British guy named Alan Millyard on YouTube?
Is that the dude that built the, like, some crazy, like, 300 cubic inch V-twin?
Yeah. He's done all kinds of crazy custom motorcycle stuff, and also built his own downhill mountain bike. The V-twin, he used the cylinders and top end from like a radial aircraft engine, and then built his own custom bottom end for it.
Yeah, I saw that.
But what made me think of it was Connor was talking about balancing the pistons and conrods and everything. The most recent one that he posted on YouTube was he took, I think it was 2 Yamaha or Honda straight 4-cylinder motorcycle engines and cut them up and made a straight 6 engine out of it. And then the whole like everything's custom, you know, like welded together, the heads, the rocker covers, the block, you know, everything. And he built his own custom crankshaft, like machined up sections and then like press fit them together and like drilled and pinned the connections. And he was going over how he balanced everything out. You know, he got these pistons from this motorcycle and these conrods from this other motorcycle and matched them up. And it was all kind of nerdy stuff, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, you know, he's like, yeah, you know, it's just easy. You just, you know, machine this and then you weld it back together and then everything's runs straight and true and there's no vibration and it's all fine. And it's like, yeah, sure. Okay, Alan. You can do that, but
it seems crazy, but it's since I become a machinist, I've been running machines for like 4 years now. And I remember I bought projects years ago and then I'd be like, oh, you know, I just got to like learn to do this and that. And then I'll be able to like do all this myself. Except that was like learning to like TIG weld aluminum and like run a mill and like hone stuff. So I was like in over my head and I got frustrated and kind of walked away. And like one good example is I bought these like scrapped Harley cases at a swap meet for like $75 because one side had a really bad crack in it. And like, I was like, oh, I'll be able to figure this out. And then I couldn't figure that out. But here I am 5 years later doing like that stuff routinely at work. And I just found those cases a couple of weeks ago and started looking over them. And what I was so daunted by that I just gave up on it like 5 or 6 years ago, I look at it now and I'm like, well, shit, this is like 2 days worth of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have built up a crankshaft for a single cylinder Vespa moped. So that took me a good long while to figure out, get everything straight and true. I can't imagine doing it for 6 cylinders, you know, that'd be quite a bit more work, but I don't know. I guess if you're patient and you got, you know, the tools and indicators and lathe and everything for it. So
there was some kind of motorcycle. I forget what the model was. I think it was a Yamaha, but it might've been Kawasaki. I don't remember, but back in the 70s, they were making them and it was a 2-stroke 3-cylinder.
Oh yeah. My uncle had one of those.
Yeah. The ones where people were making like 4, 5, and 6 cylinders out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, the crankshafts were just a press fit together, so people realized that you could just weld cases together and weld heads and just press all of the bottom end stuff together, and they were just, making these god awful death traps because even the 3 cylinders made an unmanageable amount of power.
Yeah. I forget if we talked about this on the podcast or not, but there's guys in Turkey that do that with moped engines. So it's mostly, I think, the Peugeot mopeds that they do the same thing. They, press everything together and they build up, 3 and 4 and 5 cylinder moped engines that are, like 200 cc. And then they'll go like 70 miles an hour with these, which looks pretty scary, especially with the, primitive suspension and brakes that you get on a moped.
Yeah,
Nice.
I don't think I want to go 75 on a moped.
Yeah, no. There's that one Swedish guy that's trying to do the 50cc speed record right now. And I think last time he went to Bonneville, he only got it up to like 50. And he wasn't able to go in 2020. But he's like, working on this new design. But yeah, check out his YouTube too if you want. It's Two-Stroke Stuffing is the name of that channel, which refers to like crankcase volume and stuff, I think. But I don't know. I don't quite understand the whole science of 2-stroke engines. They're black magic as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, it's probably probably a good time for Brandon to bring us into his topic.
All right.
Or hold on, unless we want to take like a short break.
Yeah, I could use a little couple minute break.
Okay, I gotta sneeze anyway.
I didn't realize everyone was gone. I think I was just talking to thin air.
I'm back now.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that I'm getting artsy here, and I'm probably going to lead into this with a poem.
Oh, that's perfect. Really, that's awesome.
Drum supported the arts.
Fuck yeah. I'm excited for this topic. It sounds definitely like a good story.
It's a lot. It's something I could probably have researched for another like 2 or 3 weeks and like just end up with this insanely exhaustive knowledge of like the peculiar ins and outs of small organizations in Detroit in like 1969. But like,
Yeah.
as far like I get lost in the weeds, but I think as far as big picture goes, I've got this pretty under control.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like any of the topics, like you could spend plenty more time on any of them, but I think we're doing well with like doing our due diligence so far.
Well, dude, this is just, to me, it's so wild because there are about probably 5 or 6 like leftist newspapers that were floating around from this era that, you can search and find like archived copies of them, or like there's a couple of universities in a few hour drive of me where I could go and like look at the old issues or microfiche or whatever. So like you can really get lost in the weeds in this because I think there's 3 newspapers that I'm going to bring up that are directly relevant to the topic.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's honestly, the more I learn about it, like the late 1960s was, we were closer to like having real revolutionary potential than I think I ever really understood.
Part of the reason I lean so hard towards Marxist-Leninism is because of what was going on in the world, but specifically in the U.S. in the late 1960s, early 1970s.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely, I can definitely understand that because it was very popular in the U.S. specifically, and I mean they were doing good fucking work.
They weren't flawless, and it's good praxis to go in and see what they were doing wrong, and a lot of them do look back at like the organizational structure being like democratic centralism and, you know, being hardcore Marxist Leninist and say, like, actually, this was a problem. We did not do these things well. We, even as an organization with no genuine authority, we still had a tendency towards like authoritarianism within the ranks and so on and so forth. So like there's valid critiques to make, but I still feel like it proved to be one of the more effective vehicles for revolution that I've ever seen. Like it really took a full government crackdown to silence that shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, seeing it now, it's like, Jesus, we're nowhere near that right now. I mean, like, it's like, it's interesting to like, for me to get into like leftism as recent as I did, it looks like it's growing. And it's like, oh, it's growing and it's growing and it's growing. But then to look back and you're like, holy fuck, we have a long way to go, which is fine, you know. But I don't know if it's harder now or if it's easier now. I mean, I can't help but think it's probably harder now just by the fact that we did better back then. You know, I think the results speak for themselves where it's like, okay, to a certain extent, the conditions had to be better back then. Because if they weren't, we'd be farther along now, is kind of my thinking. So, like, the conditions that we're currently in have really set us back.
Well, I'm going to bum you out here in a minute.
Yeah.
Because,
you know, I don't know about revolution, but at least my chicken is tasty. So,
hey, all right.
Are we all back?
I'm back.
Yep.
All good. Can everybody hear everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I hear everybody.
Mic check. Ha ha ha.
All right.
Any Rage Against the Machine fans in the house? No? All right.
I haven't listened to them in forever, but yeah, I can still appreciate them.
All right.
Same.
I mean, I liked Rage Against the Machine before I understood the full nature of their politics because I was like 13 years old. So
Yep. Yeah, same here. I liked Rage Against the Machine unironically when I was a fucking chud. So, you know, then I like read their lyrics and I was like, oh, okay.
yeah, I'm fortunate in having never gone through any sort of right wing or like fashy reactionary phase. So
Yeah, very fortunate you are. I can say that.
no, it also just means that for a while I was a really shitty leftist because like that whole like kill the cop in your head thing is fucking real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Like you can be a leftist all day long and just not realize how much like reaction is just built into the way you're raised and just the way that you think about things.
Oh, yeah.
Yup.
For
Yeah,
sure.
Zach, it was you and Paul Ryan in the conservative Rage Against the Machine fan club, I think.
Yeah, it was the two of us. Yep.
Why does everybody got to make it out like Rage Against the Machine was some sort of political band?
I don't understand why they have to bring politics into it now. I liked it better when they didn't do that.
Back before they existed.
Yeah. I love that tweet that's like, what machine did you think they were raging against? The dishwasher?
Well, I mean,
So good.
I'm sure Paul Ryan would happily rage against any dishwasher that didn't do a perfect job. So,
Yeah, he would.
Especially if that dishwasher is a person, like an immigrant, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. That's where most of his rage lies, is in dishwashers, the people, not the machines.
yeah, the rage against the machine that brings immigrants across the border.
Yeah, he's just mad at, like, transportation.
Yeah.
He's just mad at, like, all forms of transportation. Man, this is like a double fuck you to Paul Ryan podcast now.
Well, I mean, if you suck, I'm going to tell you suck. So.
And that guy double sucks.
Yeah, I mean, like, making fun of Paul Ryan's low-hanging fruit.
Oh, God, yeah, the lowest.
We're all back. We want to try and get back to it.
Let's do it.
Yep. Let's
fucking
do it.
this thing.
All right. So we are about to embark on quite a journey, fellas. Most of everything that I got from today is going to be from the book Detroit, I Do Mind Dying. But as I've told y'all, there's like just so many resources that you can still find that are like first hand or like, primary sources from back in the day because everything. So today we're talking about like revolutionary politics, unions, et cetera, in Detroit in the 1960s, specifically focused around the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement and the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. I'm gonna get weird here. We're starting this out with a poem because I found it and I absolutely fucking love it. And it was written by either a drum member or drum supporter. So, deep in the gloom of the oil-filled pit where the engine rolls down the line, we challenge the doom of dying in shit while strangled by a swine. For hours and years, we've sweated tears trying to break our chain, but we broke our backs and died in packs to find our manhood slain. But now we stand for drums at hand to lead our freedom fight, and now till then we'll unite like men, for now we know our might. And damn the plantation and the whole Chrysler nation, for drum has dried our tears. And now as we die, we've a different cry, for now we hold our spears. UAW is scum, our thing is drum. So that's that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Love it. That's amazing.
So if that last line wasn't a good indicator, this is not going to be an especially pro-union episode. Not in the normal way that you think about it. So, like,
a little bit more revolutionary, right?
Well, because a lot of this whole movement was spawned because the UAW kind of became complacent and started working a lot more with management than working to help the employees and improve conditions and so on and so forth. So to kind of set the landscape of Detroit, it was kind of a racist hellscape. It has the benefit of being a northern state that at no point was ever a slaveholding state. But by some accounts, in the 40s and 50s, KKK membership in, I can't remember if it was specifically Detroit or just Michigan in general, was in the hundreds of thousands. So it basically was as racist as current Michigan also is.
Oh, that's sad.
Because of Detroit being what it was, with having like a huge manufacturing sector because of the auto industry, it was a huge hub for migrant populations of all sorts. There were a lot of Polish immigrants, a lot of Arab immigrants, but then there was also just a lot of immigrants from the South, from Appalachia. The Great Flight from Appalachia, people having to leave to go find work. So Detroit ended up being a very peculiar sort of melting pot. And for as long as labor struggles existed, management really liked to use black folks as strikebreakers, as scabs, pitting white people against black people, against brown people, pitting everyone against each other. It's what they do. It's what they still do. They've always done it. In 1967, there was really one of the big precipitating events. This was the George Floyd being killed of the 60s. This was the Great Uprising, or some people call it the Detroit Rebellion. It was July 23rd, 1967. There was a raid on an after-hours club that was unlicensed. Details.
What is an after-hours club?
Oh, it's like a bar, but after all the other bars close, it's kind of where you go to. They still exist.
Sure.
There's a lot of them tend to be like industry clubs where like it's a place the bartenders can go drink after they stop tending bar.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of them operate legally. So I've been in some that operated illegally. Like you definitely had to know somebody to get in, so on and so forth. This particular one was not legal. It didn't necessarily warrant like a massive crackdown, but it wasn't legal. Either way, the Great Uprising in Detroit, it lasted for 5 days. 43 people died, 33 of them were black, and caused between $40 and $45 million in damages. Like, I don't think that is adjusted either. So I think it was insane. Like $40 million in 1967 dollars.
Whew. Yeah.
Jesus.
It says 2,000 buildings were destroyed.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was.
And so this was in response to them raiding and shutting down this after-hours bar.
I don't remember this. I don't know the specific process from how it escalated from a raid on an after-hours club to a civil war, but that's most of the sources I found compared it to the Civil War. It was the largest uprising since the Civil War.
Jeez.
I think
Yeah.
that, I mean, I haven't seen any sources that are as up to date as to be able to compare it to what's happened in 2020, but I think that it went unmatched for at least a couple of decades afterwards as well. Like, I don't know if anything has surpassed it up till maybe 2020. Not sure about that.
Yeah, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, it was no small thing. I mean, I really didn't know about it until I started reading on this, but it's not a hard thing to find information about. Information about this. This was a huge thing, and like that was the general mood in America in that era. Like, people were rising up and protesting and rioting and destroying things constantly. One of the things I loved was in response to claims of rioting back then, they were using the term shopping for free.
Nice. Yeah, see, that's unapologetic. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, they steal from us. Why is this wrong for us to steal from them, you know?
Yeah.
But shortly after the Great Uprising, some dudes got together and formed what is, I keep seeing referred to as a ghetto newspaper, but to be clear, that is not being used as a derogatory term. They were trying to be the voice of the ghettos. And this was the Inner City Voice. The 4 founding members of the Inner City Voice were General Baker, John Watson, Mike Hamlin, and Luke Tripp. Now, General Baker and John Watson are going to be big players in a lot of everything that's coming up. Mike Hamlin a little bit more so. Luke Tripp, I don't see that he did a whole lot of really like standout work. Cool thing about General Baker is his actual birth name was just General. He was not a general. His literal fucking name was General. That's just cool.
Nice.
And one of the things that we're going to get into here in a little bit is how a lot of these organizations related to the Black Panther Party in Detroit at the time, which it starts off amicable enough and kind of goes sour. John Watson, the big name for Inner City Voice, he was a Black Panther Party member at the time that they founded this. Inner City Voice was a pretty unapologetic Marxist or at the very least leftist newspaper. Like, all of the dudes involved in this had some background reading Marx and, you know, with revolutionary politics. A lot of the ins and outs of this get a little bit confusing for me because they were doing a lot in a very short period of time, and there's fairly limited information about this. But kind of running parallel with the Inner City Voice, there was another newspaper called South End. South End was the Wayne State newspaper. It was just the school paper. But at some point, John Watson from Inner City Voice became an editor and took editorial control over the paper and started like bringing in his own people and took it from just the school paper that had a fairly low circulation to being a full-fledged like revolutionary newspaper. It became a point of contention because he was, through whatever bureaucratic workings, they couldn't get rid of him, but they absolutely hated him. They did everything in the book, including like insane charges of anti-Semitism, because they in 1967 they were complaining about Israel's treatment of Palestinians, and so of course they were, you know, anti-Semitic and whatnot.
So nothing is new,
yep.
really.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah, they love that one.
The through line for this story is that in 2020 we're reliving 1967.
Yeah.
Every struggle I see in the last year is a struggle that they were having 50 years ago. And it hurts to read. General Baker specifically, he had a military background, not a general, but, you know, he studied Marx in college, visited Cuba in 1964, and after he got back from Cuba, he got a job at Dodge, Maine, which is like the main Dodge plant in Hamtramck, Michigan. And, you know, eventually he was fired from there for leading wildcat strikes. Now,
If you're going to get fired, that's a good way to do it.
yeah, we'll get into it more, but he got blacklisted from like the automotive industry and had to start taking jobs under assumed names and stuff. Now, the lead in before we actually get into the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement proper, there were a lot of problems with the UAE or UAW. UAE is something so much different.
Yeah, there's definitely problems with the UAE.
Yeah, I'm sure they would have complaints about the United Arab Emirates as well, but they weren't as applicable to their lives at the time. No, man. Yeah, I said this is not going to be the most resoundingly pro-union episode like you might expect, but it was because a lot of this was kind of shocking to me. In the 60s, there are so many claims that the UAW was basically just working alongside management. Like, they did good things for the workers. I don't think anyone's ever going to say that they're worse off for having a bad union, but they had a union that was not really looking out for them. It was, people of color, especially black people, were massively underrepresented. There are just endless claims of, racism, sexism. There was a large KKK membership within the UAW.
Wow.
That's a problem.
What's that?
I said, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. It was a union, but I mean, it was just reactionary as shit. And one of the focal points, I always say his name wrong, but it's Walter Reuther, I believe, right? Does anyone know?
I'm not sure who that is.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff that you can find about him. He's a high profile UAW leadership. I actually found some really good resources for Drum on some of the like Walter Reuther archives that I found.
Okay.
He was a socialist earlier in life, but he made it up to UAW leadership. And I could be getting some of his background credentials slightly off. But at one point, he was a socialist, and he did eventually become somebody who was incredibly critical of SNCC, Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. He did not like any of the revolutionary union movements. At one point in the 50s, he led a purge of communists and communist sympathizers from the UAW ranks. So,
Right.
Yep.
yeah. By this point, any genuine leftist tendencies that he had were fairly gone. There are arguments to be made that he was doing good stuff, but in the context of what we're discussing, none of the Rums were fans of his. So one of the specifically like black folks' complaints about the UAW, there really wasn't any avenues for them from within the UAW. They were generally given the most menial tasks and the most dangerous jobs. They rarely moved out of them. They weren't given any avenues to move up into skilled trades, up to and including there was a trade school just outside of the city that was a popular means for people going and, moving up from just factory work to being welders and machinists and what have you. And eventually the school implemented a policy that you had to be a resident of the city that it was in to attend it, which was a very targeted policy because that city was not overwhelmingly like it was a white fucking town. So basically they implemented a policy to make sure that no people of color were able to come in and get training to move up the ranks.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, and there was one case in 1970. This is after the Revolutionary Union movement really has a foothold, but it kind of gives you an idea of the tone. And I've told you guys about this before, but in 1970, there was a dude named James Johnson. He got fired from his job and showed back up like later in the day or the next day and killed 2 foremen and a job setter after being fired. And the conditions in the plant were so fucked up that he got off. A black dude came in and killed 2 white managers and a white job setter and was not convicted.
So basically no one would testify against him, or?
No. So one of the bigger players in drum was this dude named Ken Cockrell. He actually ended up becoming a player in Detroit politics like for the remainder of his life, pretty much starting at this point. he was notoriously an incredibly good lawyer. He defended James Johnson. Actually, Drum had this dude's back. Like, he was not a member of Drum. By all accounts, he was actually like a fairly quiet, innocuous dude who just sort of reached his tipping point. But like, as a good testament to the problems within the union, there was a shop foreman, shop steward, and I don't remember his name, but he had been getting in trouble with the union. Like, he kept trying to actually fight on behalf of union members, and he kept getting in trouble with management, and he would get fired and rehired when the union would get his back. But he was generally viewed as a problem because he was actually trying to do his job of looking out for the employees. But what happened was he was literally on his last legs. I think he was openly told that, like, if he fucked up again, he was fired for good. And so shortly after this happened, James Johnson, the guy who actually shot the 3 people, had gone to him and was trying to like improve the conditions. He was filing complaints. He was trying to go through the proper avenues to have these things improved, and he was being ignored. And the shop steward told him, "I want to help you, but they've got it out for me just as much as they've got it out for you. Like, I can't do anything to help you." And when James Johnson was caught after he had killed those 3 people, he was looking for that shop steward. The Ken Cockrell quote that I liked said that James Johnson might have been responsible, or he might have gone in there, but it was Chrysler that pulled the trigger. So basically, they just made incredibly bad conditions. They persecuted anyone who tried to do anything about it, and there was a point where people would fight, but then there was a point where they're like, well, I want to keep my job too, so I can only do so much. Another thing that people had an issue with was, even within manufacturing plants like this, some work still gets farmed out to smaller shops. The shop that I work at is about to take on a similar role. We're trying to get a contract for GM. And, the complaint that they had for the UAW is one that I could levy right this fucking moment. There was never any attempts by the UAW to unionize any of the smaller plants that they were subbing work out to. So effectively, you were able to, be a union shop getting non-union labor. And then there is just like the more generic charge that you can make against bigger unions like that of corruption. There was a lot of accounts of them being locked out of their union hall when they were supposed to have meetings because they were trying to prevent them from discussing this, that, or the other thing. There was some facility that was supposed to be built, and it was going to be this huge, like, I don't know, I think it was sort of like a vacation spot. Like, if you were in the union, this was yours to utilize. Like, you could go stay there or whatever. But it became like this, I forget the term for it, but it was just a money pit. They sunk millions and millions of dollars into this, and it became really apparent really quickly that it was a project for UAW leadership, and any Chrysler or GM or whoever, like, officials could go there. But it was something like, if every UAW member wanted to like go spend 3, 4, 5 days there for a trip, it was going to take like 15 years for everyone in the UAW to get their turn.
Yeah.
So, it was originally a project that was billed as like for the workers, and everybody really quickly realized that this was for management and bureaucrats and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I say that this is not a pro-union episode. It is. It's just, you always have to fight. Management always is going to have their boot on. What's that?
You're not pro UAW. You're saying.
I'm not saying I'm pro or anti. I honestly don't know enough about where it's at right now.
Yeah.
In 1967, I bet that you were a lot better off in a shitty union position for the UAW than you would have been if it was a non-union shop altogether.
That makes sense.
But I don't know, dude, if you're a working person, you just never get to stop fighting. That's just not the way it is in this world.
Right.
So in 1968, there was on May 2nd, there was a wildcat strike that was a response to work speed up at the Dodge main plant. I don't remember if this was the one, but the James Johnson, the guy who killed the 3 people, the reason he was fired was for refusing to participate in a work speed up. They told him that there was going to be a work speed up. He said no. He was fired.
So wait, what is a work speed up? Is that just where like management's like, hey, for the next week you're going to work more hours and you're going to work faster?
Well, a lot of this is like assembly line work. So
Yeah.
It is exactly what it sounds like. I don't even think it was usually for the next week. I think it was, hey, from here on out, we're actually operating at 110% or 120.
Oh, so this was where they literally sped up the actual assembly line. So it's
Yep.
like you have to get your task. Oh, that's fucked. That's so fucked. That's so crazy that they even thought that it's like everyone's working hard. Like, how do you think they're going to work harder? But of course, we know that capitalists will always seek to squeeze out every last fucking drop. And I guess that's the way they do it. Wow, that's, again, fucking crazy to me.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and that was like there's tons of stories in this that tend to get sparked off by a work speed up because, you know, the tendency of the
Yeah,
rate of
that's-
profit to decline, you got to offset that somehow. So you just tell your workers, okay, I know you're doing your best, but now you've got to do 10% better than your best. And, you know, universally,
Yeah.
nobody ever really fucking appreciated it. So May
Which
2nd,
actually, if you don't mind, Brandon,
yeah.
just because I've come across it a few times, but do you think you could quickly sum up the idea of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall over time? I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing you're not prepared for that necessarily, but if you have a good short explanation, it would help me, and I'm sure it would help plenty of other folks too.
Fair enough. Yeah, I can do that. The tendency of the rate of profit to fall is a phenomenon that's discussed by a lot of economists. It's not just a Marxist thing, but Marx specifically addressed it and pinned the root cause on because you constantly have to be reinvesting into production when you are in manufacturing. So you can generate higher profits, but your actual profit margins start to decline. It's one of the things that they say pushes towards monopoly because as you have to invest more and more into equipment and you start making less, like let's create a hypothetical situation. Like you have a widget that you'll make $1 off of, and you upgrade your equipment, and so now you can make more of them and make them faster and everything else. But because you reinvested into the improved widget making machine, you're actually not making $1 off of each one of them anymore. You're making 70 cents. So your profit margin is gone down, even though your profits have gone up because you can make more of them. And after endless cycles of this, you start making less and less off of each individual thing. So you have to expand more and more. And it tends to eventually lead to highly financialized economies like we're seeing right now in the US, because manufacturing starts to become more hassle than it's worth. Like you're not making, even if you're making good money, you're really having to work for it in the capitalist sense that management is really having to ride workers for it.
Yeah, so there's more and more cost. So like, you know, the variable costs of producing continue to go up, and because you have to keep reinvesting to do things better, you can make more money in absolute terms, but it's that margin that's going down.
Exactly. And so what happens is a lot of economies become financialized just because if you can make money off of interest and weird investment things, it's easier. There's just less hassle, there's less overhead, there's less machinery.
Yeah, another way I've seen it described is like as a segment of the economy or a certain industry becomes more mature, like there's more companies in that market, it becomes more competitive, and they're driving down prices just by competing with each other. And so they're each making less profit as time goes on.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor as well.
Yeah, unless there's some big innovation or something that stirs things up.
Yeah, so there's multiple parts to this, which is why, again, it's an overall tendency. But if I remember correctly, this was kind of a part where Marx was explaining, or he did partially explain that, like, because of this phenomenon, capitalism is hard for the capitalists too. They have to continuously exploit more and more from their workers, and they have to find ways to get better and better because they too are slaves to the economic system.
Exactly.
And
It's
yes.
one of the famous contradictions within capitalism.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to help clarify that for anyone who wasn't clear on that phenomenon. I know I've come across it, but it's a nuanced topic for sure.
Oh, it is. And I don't know for a fact that there were anyone before Marx that actually tried to address it and explain it. Like, I know even Adam Smith himself, like, acknowledged that it was a thing, but I don't know if he tried to explain it.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that. I've never fucking read Adam Smith.
I've been meaning to read more Adam Smith, but
Yeah, I've actually heard that it's not as abominable as you might think, but
no, it's
I
really
want to
not.
read it just so I'm versed in it. But
Yeah, he actually did have some good insights, and there was some things that he got wrong. That he's like, hey, you know what? I think this thing is going to work out because people are reasonable, and then people were not reasonable, so it didn't work that way. So that was part of
I've definitely read excerpts from Adam Smith where I'm just like, yes, this is a perfectly reasonable and valid thing that was just said.
Yeah, I
Like
love
that whole
I do.
invisible hand thing. I think that's
Yep.
mentioned in one sentence in the whole fucking book, Wealth of Nations.
Yeah, and it's supporting, and it doesn't actually work. But no one knows what it actually means. I do love throwing Adam Smith at people who are like, "Oh, you idiot socialist, you don't know anything." And then I love throwing Adam Smith at them, like, "Oh, this guy?" And they're like, "Well, I don't care who that is." And I'm like, "This is considered the father of capitalism. So, like, what are you talking about?"
Yeah, like I find that people who really stan Adam Smith don't know much about him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, back on track. I suppose.
No, we're good. All right, so yeah, on May 2nd in '68, there was a work speed up at the Dodge main plant in Hamtramck, which Hamtramck, by the way, is inside Detroit. It's like this weird city that's fully encapsulated by Detroit on all sides. So I will refer to it as being in Hamtramck because, like, there are other Dodge plants, but the one that I'm going to be referring to most often is in Hamtramck.
It's the Vatican City of Detroit.
Yeah, kind of. Hamtramck's weird. Like,
is it still a separate town?
Well, okay, so in the last few years, I used to have some friends in Hamtramck. It like went bankrupt and was supposed to be reabsorbed into the city of Detroit, but I think something happened to prevent that. So I really don't know where it stands right now.
Gotcha.
I do know, like, I think I left this out of my notes, or maybe it's just further down and I'm not, like, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I remember specifically Hamtramck's got a big Polish immigrant population at this point. So much so, and there were so many, like, Polish immigrants who had brought their politics with them from the old country that there was a Polish language anarchist newspaper in Hamtramck at this point.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Like, I can't even imagine that. That just sounds fucking awesome.
I can't even imagine any kind of leftists being from Poland. Especially looking at it today, just like
Oh, dude, there were, like, not so much in this story, but if you look at a lot of, like, 60s and 70s stuff, there were a lot of Eastern European immigrants who brought some hardcore leftist politics with them to the U.S. Like, you had Italian syndicalists and, like, probably some Spanish anarchists, and yeah, there were a wide array of leftists from Europe that were migrating into the U.S. Leftism in that period when there was a lot of immigration to the U.S. is just wild.
Yeah.
Like, you end up with a weird little thing in Detroit where there's a Polish language anarchist newspaper.
Yeah, I love it.
There was a lot of that stuff. I know I'll get into a little bit of it here in a little bit. But yeah, so at that work speed up, I don't know a ton of the details. It was, I think, a fairly effective wildcat strike. I think it prevented the work speed up, but they fired a lot of people. I want to say it was like 70 or 80 people got fired because of this.
That is
Wow.
a very big number.
Well, I think all but 2 or 3, less than 5 people were not rehired. And
Okay.
one of those people was General Baker, the guy that I mentioned earlier. This is the point where he had to take on an assumed name and
Yes.
and got a job at one of the Ford plants. On July 8th, same year, 1968, this was the first, I believe this was officially the first wildcat strike led by the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement. It was in response to just general conditions in the shop. There were 4,000 participants, 4,000 people struck with them. It lasted for 2.5 days, and they prevented the manufacturing of 3,000 cars.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. It is worth noting the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, really the Revolutionary Union movements in general, like the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, which we'll get to in a minute, they made no qualms about it. They did not give a fuck if Chrysler made a single red cent. They wanted their share of the pie. Like they were. Drum is a Marxist-Leninist organization. They did not care about the capitalists. They did not even really care about the union. They cared
so
about
they would take
the
their
workers. What's that?
Yeah, so they were fighting for like, we're going to fight you on all this stuff, but we want the full value of our labor. We want to put you. We want this to eventually be owned by the goddamn workers. Like, we're not stopping until we're there. That's awesome.
You know, you're talking in the 60s. They were trying to fight for the 30-hour work, like 30 hours for 40 hours pay, and like they really like.
That's inspiring.
The UAW and Chrysler, Ford, GM all could go fuck themselves. They wanted every penny that they produced, rightly fucking so.
Love it.
And it like. Once this was formed, that was the most successful drum action. It was, I think, their first and sadly probably the most effective that they had, because they had a pretty good amount of support within the plants at this point. This is around the point when the South End effect, like the South End is the school newspaper that they sort of like took editorial control over. That became effectively the official Drum newspaper, because the founding members of Drum were working as the editors of South End. Like,
gotcha.
They did like a lot of fairly normal tactics, a lot of leafleting, handing out things outside of plants. They provoked a few wildcats. With sort of decreasing efficacy, and we'll get to why that was going on the way it was. They kind of just fucking didn't like anybody.
And real quick, I'm not sure if we mentioned this, but a wildcat strike is when it's not with the blessing of the union. It's just the workers themselves making a strike, going on strike without the organization of the union officials.
Yeah, that's why you can get fired for it, because you're usually violating the union contract when you do it.
Right. And we've seen some of those with the teacher strikes in, was it 2019, I believe?
Right, yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah, their tactics in a lot of ways, were fairly ordinary. This is where we're going to get into their distinctly leftist tendency to infight.
I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all are familiar, but leftists don't love anything as much as they love arguing with each other and having infights and blow-ups that just destroy everything. And this is not going to be a story that is free of that. What's that?
How dare you?
Yeah. Hot take. Yeah, man, these guys, they really they sort of started shit with everyone.
So is that kind of part of their downfall? Is like they were revolutionary and they were not afraid to fight with management, but unfortunately they were also willing to fight with any kind of other leftist.
So like it wasn't even really the leftists. Like in most of this story, everything that I encountered was Marxist-Leninist. Most of them really didn't agree or didn't disagree much about the specific vehicle as much as individual tactics. And they also, and I think this is where one of their greatest flaws is there was multiple ways of thinking, and some people thought that they should have a really like a small but intense and dedicated hardcore like vanguard cadre in each shop. You know, maybe you only have a few people, but they are diehards. And a lot of people kind of felt the opposite. Like, well, we can sacrifice, like, we don't need everyone to be the most intense if we have literally everyone. So it was very much a quantity versus quality of membership sort of argument.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, at this point, it's worth mentioning that the Dodge, like, we're probably not even the right fucking people to be covering this because most of this is a distinctly like black movement. I will get into some of the white organizations that were running parallel, but the party line between Drum and the other Rums and then the League of Black Workers was that they were organizing the black and brown people of the area. Like they did actually fight a lot for the rights of a lot of Arab immigrants as well, because they shared the same burden as the black people in that they were given the shit work. They were given the dangerous work, you know. They were largely in the same boat. Yeah. More so than they were with, you know, there were other groups of working class people, like white working class people who they could work with, but like they were not treated the same. And that I think is important. Yeah, and we'll get to that because there's another parallel organization called the Motor City Labor League that was the white equivalent of the Rums. That was again another like acutely Marxist-Leninist organization. Like you can still find a handful of releases, like writings that they released from back then. They were a lot harder to find information on. But there's actually one guy. Oh, John Taylor. John Taylor was a member of the Motor City Labor League, and he has a long, little several page long bit inside Detroit I Do Mind Dying, where he goes into details on the attitudes of a lot of the different organizations. You know, he worked management, he worked in the actual plants, he worked for some of the newspapers. The guy had like a wide variety of jobs, some more white collar than blue collar, and he saw a lot of different things, but he was always a friend of the worker. He was a Marxist-Leninist. He laid out some really valid critiques, especially as they pertain to him. You know, Drum, and as we'll get to in a second, Elrum, which is the Eldon Avenue manufacturing plant, they really didn't even I shouldn't say they didn't like white people, but they were wholly unwilling to organize with them. If they were handing out leaflets or pamphlets outside of a plant, they refused to hand them to white workers.
Gotcha.
They even that guy himself, John Taylor, said that after he became friends with them and they kind of knew who he was, but maybe not everyone knew who he was having to have friendly Drum members sneak him their literature. And, you know, there were weird things because Drum was it was a lot of the younger people in the plant. There were a lot of older black people who had been in the plants for years and had different ideas and different attitudes. I've read in other places that just because of like the history of slavery, a lot of like everything had to be done in so much secrecy that sort of culture developed very strongly in black communities of being secretive about the actions that you're taking. So a lot of there was a lot of conflicting approaches to how to do this, and a lot of times the older black workers would not agree with them, and instead of like trying to bring them into the folds, they'd call them Uncle Toms and honky dogs and just call them fucking pigs. Like, they were really disparaging to people who didn't agree with them rather than trying to bring them into the folds. There was a big faction of, like, because as the organization was larger at one point, it wasn't ideologically pure. They were largely ML, but that doesn't mean that everyone had done all of the reading and had done all their homework assignments and turned them in on time, et cetera, et cetera. Like, y'all know how it is, dude. If you're a fucking leftist, you're supposed to have read a full fucking library, and some people don't have the fucking time for that. So there was like a big vein of black nationalism in this, and that tended to be divisive and alienating for a lot of people. Throughout several of the wildcat strikes that they organized, there was a lot of criticisms that they just acted too quickly. They didn't really build a large base. They didn't have strike funds. They didn't prepare thoroughly. So there was one particular strike that Elrom led that ended up like devastating the members of their org because they led a wildcat strike, and then most of them got fired. So
yeah, that sucks. That's generally best avoided.
It was, their hearts were in the right place, but a lot of it just boiled down to when they wanted to improve things and they didn't want to wait, and none of us do, but sometimes you have to. So there's a constant struggle in this whole story of like big picture versus little picture.
Yeah.
Some people, we'll get more to it, but there were a lot of people who wanted like national organizations and really a lot of ideological. God, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, there was a lot of big picture people and a lot of little picture people. A lot of people really didn't care if they were connected to an organization in Chicago or Los Angeles or Oakland or New York or whatever. They just wanted to improve the material conditions in the plant where they worked.
Yeah. So
another one of the big RUMs was, as I mentioned, Elrum. It's the Eldon Avenue manufacturing plant. So it's the Eldon Avenue Revolutionary Union movement. This one actually became bigger than Drum. At its peak, it had more members than they ever had at Dodge, Main. In 1969, January 1969, Elrum presented the UAW with a list of grievances. And a few days later, that was when they went on organized a wildcat strike. Their grievances were grotesque. There was just an endless amount of complaints of, women were being sexually harassed. They were being overtly racist towards black workers. Safety complaints were wholesale ignored. There's just so many stories about people being killed by some like machinery that was supposed to be decommissioned for repairs and wasn't, just doing unsafe things because they were forced to. It never fucking stops. Like, the union was not doing its fucking job and people were dying because of it. And that was what caused the RUMs to form. So, this is the wildcat strike where they shot themselves in the foot. They managed to keep out 2/3 of the workers at the Eldon Avenue plant on the first day and half on the second. But after that, it was over. And so many of the Elrum members were fired that it really it cut the movement off there at the knees. And again, John Taylor, in his excerpt, he goes into a lot of details on stuff that they did wrong. Like, they really did not prepare for that strike. They got mad, or
they were impassioned. I mean, that makes sense. You're like, this is so egregious that everyone will be on our side. Now is the time to strike. They fucked up really bad this time, and everyone's going to agree with us. And so you think that, that passion is what's going to win the day. But unfortunately, without strike funds, without that sobering realization that your jobs are actually on the line, things can go awry very quickly.
And so a big criticism of Elrum, especially during that wildcat, was they wouldn't talk to white workers. Like, they were not actively trying to bring, like, it's one thing to say, like, I'm a big fan of the model that the Rainbow Coalition did in Chicago, where you had the Black Panthers working alongside the Young Lords, working alongside the Young Patriots organization, which, for those who don't know, basically the Black Panthers were the Black Panthers, the Young Lords were the Latino version of the Black Panthers, and the Young Patriots were the white version of the Black Panthers in Chicago. So that is a model that, especially for the era, had proven some efficacy. It was able to effectively organize along cultural lines, but still come together for the big picture so that it was a unified movement.
That was as a model, that was something that like Fred Hampton can be credited with, and it was a good idea, and obviously it was threatening enough that it did
got him killed.
It led to literally J. Edgar Hoover personally getting involved. Like, okay, this shit's too dangerous. It is a good model, and unfortunately at the time, I understand why there was animus between, these different cultural groups, and it's like, we know now that it's like, looking back, we're like, yeah, if they could have worked together better, things would have maybe worked out a little bit better. But we also know that, like, given the time and given the politics of the day, why it was a lot harder then than it is now. Like, now we can be united much more easily from that perspective than they could back then. We have other struggles now, but like it definitely, you see now when you look back and you're like, damn, that really sucks that they, we get why they did it. They were that was the situation they were in. But yeah, it may have looked a little different if the approach had been a little different.
I mean, I get it, especially in that era when there was so much of like de facto or official segregation. Even if you are completely anti-racist and egalitarian across the board, it's still just going to be easier to organize amongst the people that you have the most in common with. So yeah, it's a good model. In my opinion, in America, it might be the best model that we've ever had, and it's still worth pursuing. One of the big problems as it pertains to this is that this is not the model that Elrum was pursuing.
No, yeah, and that's what I mean when I'm talking about looking back. That was a real issue, and like, I think you said it right. The Rainbow Coalition was something different from what this group was doing, and that seemingly was a better method.
Well, and this will get into like sort of the split between the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and the Black Panther Party, but. And, at that point, a lot of the members of the individual RUM in that plant, they weren't thinking about this on an ideological national scale. That's what I was going to say was a lot of the split with the Black Panther Party and like why this doesn't quite jive with the model of the Rainbow Coalition in Chicago is that a lot of these things are big ideological sort of things. And the Revolutionary Union movements largely thought of themselves as just singularly working to improve the material conditions in the plants where their members worked. They weren't necessarily trying to win everyone over, very fucking obviously, but they weren't fighting. I don't want to say they weren't fighting an ideological battle, because clearly at this point you definitely are. But they were trying to do it on the front lines, on the factory floor, and they weren't a lot of them weren't interested in expanding outward. It's eventually what caused the entire like rift between the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, was the inability to decide whether they were doing big ideological picture or in plant looking out for the individual workers.
So I think like almost we can take away that like you kind of always have to be doing both. It seems like, just in general, you have to consider both, because we want to act locally, right? In our respective workplaces, in our towns, we want to organize there on the local level, but we need to also be considering the bigger picture.
Okay, I'm so glad that you didn't say the like act locally, think globally. I didn't drive out.
I was waiting for it. I was I
Me
really
too.
thought it was about to happen.
Fists
No.
clenched. I was like, "Don't do it! Don't do it!"
No, I didn't. I didn't bring it down to a slogan. I have real thoughts.
It just seemed that like that's where that was going, and I was like, you can't be that trite, and you weren't. So to your credit,
I'll take all the credit I can get.
yeah. But really, the last thing I have to say about Elrum, and I don't even know how to shoehorn this in. This is a weird thing, and I'll explain myself. But this will be the last thing I have to say before we get to the founding of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. Is in a lot of this material, they talk about this dude Jordan Sims, and I if you Google the dude, I can't find anything about him except for references to him and other stuff. And what it boils down to, and I couldn't even find the pages that I had bookmarked in my actual book that went into more detail on this. So I'm really like struggling with the details on it. But Jordan Sims was not a member of any of the Revolutionary Union movements. He was a dude. He got fired during one of the strikes, but he ran for, I think, president of the local that represented the Eldon Avenue plant. And I don't understand how unions work. I didn't know that you could literally get fired from the factory and then run for a position in the union. But apparently that's how it was. But there were it seems that Elrum supported this dude. They were very critical of him because they did take a very like Leninist position of like, no, if you get this elected position, that's basically reformism. They were worried that he was going to get into this position and then he wasn't going to be a worker and he was going to start kowtowing to management and just doing what he's told and towing the line. By all accounts, that's not what he did. He actually seems like somebody who stood up for the rights of the workers through and through, as much as I could find information about him. But the specific thing that caused a bit of a kerfluffle at that plant was, just to give you an idea of the problems that they were having with the union. With the election, it was Jordan Sims, who was a black guy, against the other dude who was white. And they got locked out of the union hall and like had to break in. And I might be mixing up two stories because there was a lot of this stuff, but they were really trying to pull some shady shit around the election of Jordan Sims. He did get elected, but there seems to have been a lot of conflict surrounding this election because he had the backing of Elrum. But even then, only sort of. And everybody who opposed him and didn't like the Revolutionary Union movement were like trying to tear him down, saying like, "Oh, Elrum loves this guy. He's a revolutionary. You don't want him in leading the union because he's going to take it in this like awful direction." In the same way that Joe Biden's a Marxist or something. Like that's the attack that they had to levy against him because he had the support of a radical organization. By all accounts, Elrum themselves did back him, but like cautiously. They weren't like all about this dude. They were just like, yeah, he seems good. Let's give him a shot.
Yeah, so he was like, they weren't crazy about him, but they're like, yeah, this is who we're going to back. He's not perfect, which a lot of people would kind of, I feel like, liken to like a Bernie Sanders, where you're like, yeah, he's not a full leftist. He's not great, but like, he's the best option, clearly.
I mean, like, I actually found one of the articles. It's a scan of an article from the newspaper where they were like, I don't even remember which paper this was in, but yeah, it's in Wayne State's Walter Reuther archives, who was the UAW like leader at the time, where they go into how they were trying to rally whites against this dude by saying he had the support of black militant auto workers.
Yeah, that would be a selling point for me. But
yeah, I would be fucking on board. But then that would be extra funny because they wouldn't give a fuck about your opinion or want your support or help. So like there was a lot of times when they really weren't doing themselves any favors.
Sure. Now, just so I'm understanding, Jordan Sims was running for a local branch of the UAW.
Yeah,
Right.
he was running for a position. I don't know the structure of the union then or now. I mean, I have not been blessed with a union job ever, but
Yeah, me neither.
they're harder to come by nowadays. But
Yo.
yeah, he was running for a more local position. Like, I think he was running for something in their specific local.
Okay.
So he wasn't ever like, he wasn't on track to be like some like highfalutin, top tier union guy that was going to get all the kickbacks and mob money and all that shit. He seemed to be genuinely concerned about the workers and doing what was right. And like I said, by all accounts, after he did win the election contentiously, he did continue fighting for people. Like, it seems like people were a fan of his. It's wild because all of the literature that I can come across for the RUMs, for the Motor City Labor League, he's brought up a whole lot in Detroit, I Do Mind Dying. Outside of by 1975, I can't find hide nor hair of him. If you Google search his name with like UAW or RUM or anything like that, I don't find anything except occasional like newspaper articles from in any of the radical rags that were floating around at the time. So, like, he seems to have been a very important figure to a select group of people at a specific point in time, and then just became another, like, regular-ass dude doing his job. And if y'all want to take a break, that is a good stopping point before we get into the League of Revolutionary Black Workers.
All right. That sounds
Sure.
good. We'll
Sounds
stop
good to
here.
me.
We'll probably come out with part 2 following that.
We don't think you fight fire with fire, bitch. We think you fight fire with water, bitch. We gonna fight racism, not with racism, but we gonna fight with solidarity. We said we're not gonna fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we going to fight with socialism.
Amazingly, or not so amazingly, Cuba's crime rate is one of the lowest in the entire hemispheres. Oddly enough, it seems that when people have their basic human needs met, they're less likely to commit crimes.
My calculations are correct. When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
The free market mythology, it argues that the most ruthless, selfish, opportunistic, greedy, calculating plunderers, applying the most heartless measures in cold-blooded pursuit of corporate interest and wealth accumulation, will produce the best results for all of us. Through something called the invisible hand.
What are you smiling about?
Dude, I almost had you.